Now, joining me in the studio for the rest of the program are two analysts who approach the National Assembly from different vantage points. One is a legislative consultant who understands how bills are actually made, how language is negotiated, how power moves in committee rooms, and how decisions are shaped long before they reach the floor of the Senate. The other is a former newspaper editor and a close observer of Nigeria's political machinery who has spent decades interrogating the relationship between the legislature and the executive and asking whether Parliament still acts as an independent check on power or increasingly as its partner. Together, they'll help us cut through the noise, the procedure, and the politics. Trust newspaper Mahmood Jega and the legislative consultant and public policy analyst, Dr. Chibuzo Okereke. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Just noticed that Mahmood Jega has lost his microphone, so let me start with you, Chibuzo Okereke, while they try to fiddle around and see if they can find where it fell. Just strip away the language and the politics based on what you heard. Did the Senate meaningfully change Clause 60, subsection 3, or did it simply repackage it?
Charles, I think this is a battle between democratic integrity and political survival, of politicians. So first, I think a level of incremental progress has been made, and thanks to the Nigerian people who trooped out in the street demanding that they need a better transparency in the electoral governance framework. Because the Senate started, in fact, this is their biggest approval of vote and proceedings ever in this 10th Assembly, taking a crucial time, to do this. So first they started with that motion to rescind the decision of last week, which now clearly puts it on record that actually they retained the 2022 provision in that section 60. So with the motion by the Senate whip that to rescind that decision, they now have to reframe the section 63 to reflect part of what Nigerians are asking for, which is the mandatory e-transmission of election results. Because before now, it was at discretion of INEC. So with what Senate had done, it appears they listened to the Nigerian people. But you could also see the provisor that shows there's still kind of a fear for political survival within the Senate, to the fact that a provisor that, where there are network failures, we will revert back. Because the primary source already is the election result, which is the form EC 88 that the presiding officers will have to, fill, right? So I think they have made that decision. First, the Nigerian people forced them back to have emergency sitting to now rescind their decision that they took earlier, and then made a better progress in terms of framing that particular provision. Yeah.
Okay, let me come to you, Mahmood. I see, thankfully, you've got your microphone back. You've got your microphone back. Is there anything in the current wording from your assessment of this approval by the Senate that legally compels real-time transmission, or is that still optional in practice?
I think the explanation this evening by Governor Okereke Dixon was very important. He concedes that it's not everything people have been agitating for in the past week that was achieved, but that there was some incremental progress. And the most important one is, unlike in 2023, when the IREV phenomenon was in the INEC guidelines, which was why I think it was Dr. Olisa Agbakoba who said yesterday, when the 2023 presidential election case went to Supreme Court, and some people said, we couldn't see IREV, it collapsed, this and that. The Supreme Court's position was, that one was not mandated by the law. Go and bring the Form EC8, that's the main one. This one was essentially for public viewing, So even if people couldn't see it, it does not invalidate the election result. But this time, having written it into the law, I suspect it will have an effect if matters were to get to the courts.
Right.
And then they will say, well, this is mandatory, why didn't you do it? Although, I don't know in the end how that will square with the caveat that unless there is a failure of network, that one is certainly guaranteed to happen. Even this morning I was in a bank just to renew my debit card, and they said there is a network failure, please go and come back tomorrow. Now, if even banks in a small place in Abuja cannot guarantee a network connectivity, I wonder what will happen in a general election in the rural areas and other places.
That's a good point. And Dr. Chibuzo Okereke, I mean, listening to what he said, Mahmoud Jega just said, and you have your knowledge of the law and all the sort of the legal sort of stuff around all this, is there anything in the current wording, bearing in mind that they have not actually passed the final thing, they've still got to reconcile and, you know, and all of that. Is there anything in the current wording that legally, or let me put it this way, if this law were tested in court tomorrow, would it clearly protect electronic transmission as a primary way that evidence of results is shown, or is this still the EC, the form EC8?
I think no will be the answer, Charles. It will not effectively protect electronic transmission as the authentic way for collation. And why do I say this? Section 60 speaks to counting of results and the forms. It is actually Section 62 that people are ignoring. And you see, IREV is not just a creation of INEC regulation. It's actually a product of the powers they have within Section 62 of the Electoral Act, which establishes a national electronic database of results. If you read the framing of Section 62, it will amaze you that it, as of today, is still a distinct database, which is just for repository of results. So if you go to Section 63 and say that there is now mandatory transmission of results by the presiding officers, which shall be basis for collation, and which is the interesting thing I think Senate offered that weren't there before. Before now, transmission is for viewership, is not the basis for collation. And they mentioned it shall be the basis for collation. But we still ignore Section 62 that claims that the IREV and the National Electronic Database for Results shall be a distinct repository. When you hear that something is distinct, so there is a disconnect between that mandatory provision for Section 63 and what 62 has prescribed for the purpose of IREV. So if you go to court with these two, if you cross-reference the two sections and go to court, especially when the marginal note for 62 is speaking to post-election collation, and we are talking about transmission as basis for collation, we need to reconcile this 63 and the Section 62 and make sure that we are clear that e-transmission of results shall be mandatory and it shall be immediately after the formalities for entering results and announcing it, and it shall be the basis for collation, which is very central. The interesting thing is that politicians know these facts and how they can navigate it in court, that if it is not the basis for collation, you cannot tally anything after transmitting it. It's just for you to view and see the result for the purpose of if anybody alters it at the ward or local government level, you go to court with what you have now gotten from the IREV.
Right. Yeah. Well, the whole thing sounds ferociously
complicated.
And it also is starting to sound a little bit depressing, I have to say, because I mean, you start to think, okay,
that's why
you climb one hill and there's 1,000 more
we don't want people fixated with the issue, the concept of real time, has currently been defined by some of our colleagues, which I do not want anybody to exhibit some level of intellectual arrogance to give, and I support the position of Senator Dixon on that issue of real time. You cannot ascribe contextual definition. And the interesting thing, Charles, is that in the interpretation clause, which is always part of every bill, we must now define in this bill, transmission means this, real time means this. If you don't have it in the interpretation clause, you will face the challenge.
Well, they don't appear to have it, and they've
well,
gone to the
even
harmonization,
even the transfer
which
was
means
not
that
there
it's
before.
not going to. Well, let me bring in Mahmoud Jega here. Well, what are your thoughts on this so far?
On what?
Well, what he's been talking about. Or are you as befuddled as I am?
I think everybody is. The issue basically has been mistrust has come into all this. And it's very unfortunate for the Senate because in the last 1 week it has lost a lot of goodwill with the public. And the people think, and you see, it is not just the electoral act and all this real transmission. The delay in passing the electoral act itself was an issue. People were saying, why did you sit on this amendment for so long, and INEC cannot issue a timetable because of this. And then there are other developments in the political sphere, like, for example, the PDP crisis. And just last week we heard that INEC invited the Wike faction of the PDP to come and sit in the meeting, and all these defections and all that. So already there is an atmosphere of suspicion that things are going wrong with the planning. So the Senate now walked into this minefield with its own shenanigan attempts, and that's why people are. But otherwise, probably what Governor Dixon said is very true, that without electronic voting, why are you talking about...
Right. But let me pick you up on something you said earlier, because you talked about your own personal experience with the so-called network failure when you went to the bank. And that clearly appears to be a genuine logistical concern. Even though a lot of people think it's a political safety valve, written into Nigerian election law, safety valve for the politicians. But in your assessment, who realistically determines a network failure on election day? And how vulnerable is that decision to manipulation?
Honestly, so that it does not become a very huge loophole. You see, for example, look at the constitutional provision that members of national or state assemblies that defect to other parties will lose their seats unless there is a division in the party that you are leaving. That has become just a huge loophole. People are just using it every day. I cannot remember any legislator whose seat was declared vacant because he defected. Because really, if you move to the ruling party, the speaker will not declare your seat vacant. You can always say there was a division in the party, not at the national, maybe even in your local government, there is division, and that is a reason. So politicians are very clear. But honestly, Ogachan, what I'm thinking of is all this debate about whether there is electronic transmission, real time, or all that. The politicians should not shirk their own essential responsibilities, for example, of policing every polling unit, making sure they deploy agents there, sit through, observe the election,
and being
ethical, collect the form, is it EC8 and all that,
EC8A.
because before the technological age in 1983, the UPN was able to reverse the gubernatorial election results in Ondo State based on the result sheets that its agents brought from all the polling units in the state. They meticulously brought it up to the Supreme Court. It was checked, and it was seen that the alteration of the overall result happened at the state collation level, where the MPN candidate got 500,000 votes, the UPN candidate got 1.2 million votes, and then the returning officer just added one behind the 500,000, and it became 1.5 million. Now, a serious political party was able to do that in 1983, before we had computers.
Although people would say that the level of manipulation was not quite as bad then
as it is now.
But let me give you the final word. Chibuzo Okereke, you know, as I said, you understand these things better than we do. So in very simple language that we can all understand as we plod along, does elevating Form EC8A reopen the same chain of custody problems that the reforms were meant to end in 30 seconds?
I don't think so. But again, you cannot make a proviso for something you don't have control of.
Right.
The Nigerian state has liberalized the digital technology sector, so that even the NCC is just a regulator, it's not a player. So you will need to sign MOU with the key service providers for you to hold them accountable for any form, of failure. So I think that proviso is not necessary. But I must also make this point
we've got 10 seconds.
Distinguished Senator Baribe dropped the ball. He would have been the hero of the day. It's important to have division, and people should take a position.
So he should have proceeded
with it. There's
On
no
that
point
note,
to withdraw the
Dr.
motion.
Chibuzo Okereke, legislative consultant, public policy analyst. You can see why. Thank you very much indeed. And of course, Mahmood Jega, Arise News analyst and former chairman of the editorial board of Daily Trust newspaper. Thank you very much indeed. That's it for this edition of Arise Prime Time. Join us again tomorrow. From me and the entire team here in Abuja, bye-bye, and thank you for watching.